All right, here's a good one for my COVID people on both sides of the aisle. This is from the New York Times. Good morning. COVID zero isn't going to happen, but normal life still can. 10 years ago, a deadly infectious disease killed more than 36,000 Americans. The next year, it killed 12,000 more. And over each of the following 8 years, the same disease caused between 22,000 and 62,000 deaths. That disease is influenza, known as the flu, and it ranks among the 15 leading causes of death in the United States. Talking about the effects of a typical flu is somewhat fraught these days. We are living through the worst pandemic in a century, one that is of a different order of magnitude from influenza. In the early months of COVID-19, some people who were trying to deny its severity, including President Trump, claimed it was barely worse than the flu. That's false. Here's the chart. Soon, however, the flu will become a meaningful point of comparison. In the months coming, COVID will probably recede as a result of vaccinations and growing natural immunity, but it will not disappear. Some people have gotten this idea that we're going to get COVID zero. Dr. Amish Aldilja of Johns Hopkins University told me that's not realistic. It's a fantasy. Not zero, but normalcy. COVID is caused by a coronavirus known as SARS-CoV-2, and coronaviruses often circulate for years, causing respiratory infections and the common cold. The world is not going to extinguish coronaviruses anytime soon, nor will it extinguish this specific one. The coronavirus is here to stay, as a recent article in the science journal Nature by Nikki Phillips concluded. The reasonable goal is to make it manageable, much like the seasonal flu. Fortunately, the vaccines are doing that. In fact, they're doing better than that. For fully vaccinated people, serious illness from COVID is extremely rare, much rarer than a serious illness from the seasonal flu. Israel, the country that vaccinated the largest share of its population, offers a case study. One recent analysis looked at 602,000 Israelis who had received COVID vaccines and found that only 21 later contracted the virus and had to be hospitalized. 21 is obviously not zero. Vaccines are almost never perfect, but the COVID vaccines are turning it into the sort of risk that people accept every day. Here's a useful way to think about Israel's numbers. Only 3.5 out of every 100,000 people vaccinated were later hospitalized with COVID symptoms. During a typical flu season in the U.S., by comparison, roughly 150 out of every 100,000 people are hospitalized with flu symptoms. And yet the seasonal flu does not grind life to a halt. It does not keep people from flying on airplanes, eating in restaurants, visiting their friends, or going to school and work. Vaccines will not produce COVID zero, but they are on pace, eventually and perhaps even by summer, to produce something that looks like normalcy. The rare exceptions won't change that, no matter how much attention they receive. Stephen Barrow, an infectious disease expert, wrote on Twitter, risk assessment, absolutely. Risk mitigation, absolutely. Risk management, absolutely. Risk communication, absolutely. Risk elimination, impossible. So eventually, that is what is hoped for. I think that's what even President Trump was talking about within a year or two. Not that it's going to go away, but basically they're going to learn how to treat it. And if they learn how to treat it properly, then it'll still be bad if you come down with severe symptoms, but the likelihood of you coming down with severe symptoms will get less and less and less. And basically, more than likely, once they learn how to treat it, you won't die. The reason you don't really die from the flu like you used to is because they know how to treat it. The flu's been around for 200 years, and especially after the Spanish flu that killed upwards of 30, 40 million people, over time they learned how to treat it. So even though what we call influenza, I think is influenza A, that's the variant of the Spanish flu, even though it's still around and it's not as infectious as it used to be, which is good, they know how to treat it a lot better. And eventually with COVID, they're going to learn how to treat it and they're going to go back to normal. So the vaccines, even though I'm not that sold on them right now, because of the risk, those vaccines will get better and better and better to the point where COVID won't go away, but it'll be manageable. But as you can see the chart, that day is not today. COVID is not the flu. Okay, let's get that 100% correct. COVID is not the flu. I don't know why people keep saying that it is. Okay, everybody keeps throwing around numbers, and the numbers that they throw around aren't even accurate. They don't even go to the CDC and actually look it up, because it's like I always tell people, if you're going to argue about COVID being just like the flu, at least look it up. You at least go to the CDC and look up the flu numbers. They print them every year. At least do that. Now, I just had a cat. In fact, I'm going to put his comment up. Dumb ass stuff. Okay. Pulling numbers out of his behind and then telling me to do better. Dude, you could have went to the CDC and looked it up. You went to the CDC and looked it up. You know, the chart that I showed, that's where they got it from. And they'll tell you their methods. Now, over time, do they estimate the amount of deaths and the amount of cases they get according, without testing? Yeah, they do. But just because they estimate, which they're a lot better at it than you, doesn't mean you can just pull it out of your behind. And unlike the flu, they test, trust and believe, they test every COVID patient. They test. If you got a COVID symptom, they're going to test you. And what they want to do is test everybody that they can. And as you can see, there's a lot more negative people, according to the test, than positive. And I've had people around me that have had COVID. And the people that have got tested, some people, even in the same household, you have a couple people that come up positive, and you get the other people that come up negative. And the people that came up positive had symptoms. I mean, sometimes severe symptoms. There are no COVID cases without a COVID test. They're really strict about that. And saying it's just like the flu, or the flu is worse, you don't have a clue about what you're talking about. I do mean no clue. And it's not just the United States, it's all over the world, which nobody talks about. They think, okay, the United, just because it's in the United States, they're making it up, but the rest of the world isn't. Okay, make that make sense. Anyway, since it was a short article, I'm not going to make my commentary much longer than that. So with that, I'm going to jump off of here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.